doctors who adopt and adapt to artificial intelligence are going to replace those who do not. And like I like to quote Jack Welch, the legendary chairman of GE, I think we as doctors, we as healthcare professionals have to change. He said, change before you have to. And the second thing I like what he said is control your own destiny or someone else will. So I think the future is very, very bright, and it is the digital revolution that's going to make the entire change.
Welcome to the Blue Circle. It's such a big privilege and a pleasure to reconnect with everyone, our distinguished panelists who are handpicked because of the think input and the rich experience that they bring in. And thank you to our distinguished audience for joining in. We've received over 150 registrations, most of whom are CEOs, CXOs, and senior leaders. Many of them are our members and are repeat visitors to our webinars, which motivates us and provides us and motivates us to provide even higher levels of dialogue through the online channels as well. For those of you who are new with us today, the Blue Circle is an exclusive community and ecosystem which is curated for business leaders across 6 sectors, which are healthcare, e-mobility, energy, real estate, logistics, and aerospace and defense. We also present socioeconomic insights which ultimately determine the evolving complexion of the market. In response to the COVID challenge, the Blue Circle has also accentuated its digital presence. One of the many modes we employ is our weekly webinar series and our digital publication. And in addition to this, and you'll be happy to know that we're very soon launching an exclusive digital platform which is curated for leaders, somewhat like the sector-specific LinkedIn for leaders, wherein we will present them with the opportunity of connecting with people just like them, also house high-quality curated content, have such meaningful conversations like the ones we're going to have today as well, and also give leaders access to business opportunities across these sectors. So those leaders who are interested, please do write to us. We've begun our selective outreach and have over 3,000 senior leaders who've signed up in the last 3 to 4 months. And today we're privileged to have distinguished thought leaders who have joined in for the Healthcare Circle's discussion. They're here to discuss the emerging business models in 2021 and beyond in the healthcare sector. And now, in the best interest of time, I will just briefly mention the names and designations of the panelists who joined in. We have with us Mr. Gautam Khanna, CEO, Hinduja Hospital, Dr. Harsh Mahajan, Founder and Chief Radiologist, Mahajan Imaging, Mr. Sunil Thakur, Partner, Quadria Capital, and the Chair and Moderator for the session is Dr. Rana Mehta, Partner and Leader, Healthcare, PwC. Thank you very much, sirs, and thank you to the audience. I now request Dr. Rana to please chair and moderate the session, sir.
Thank you, Siddharth. And, I must thank everyone on the panel being here. I think these are the most challenging times we've ever seen for a long, long time. Probably the biggest blown healthcare crisis the country has ever faced. And it goes back to something I read a long time ago, that healthcare is a very peculiar sector. It's always in a perpetual crisis. So if you actually picked up a newspaper, say 50 years ago, it'd say that, you were in a crisis. Healthcare, you pick up a newspaper today and, healthcare is in crisis. And trust me, if you pick up a newspaper 50 years later, healthcare still will be a crisis. So it's one of those sectors which follows what's called Taylor's law, that it's in. And the reason for that is, by the time we get the answers, the questions change. And that's why the crisis continues. I think exemplified very well by the pandemic. Before we got the first wave, it mutated, it became the second wave. It's now very contagious, but less virulent. So it keeps changing. I think 3 things have happened in the last 1 year. I think one of the things which overall we look at is that the face of the corporation has changed. We always spoke about, stakeholder value. I think what do you do with stakeholder value when people are dying? How do you move it to actually protecting society? And then how, at the end, a healthcare crisis can cause an economic meltdown. We've also had to rethink hospitals. We had to rethink the business models. And today, I think the whole component of getting together today is to look at, what are the new business models in a post-pandemic India. I'll start with Dr. Harsh Mahajan. Dr. Mahajan, the severity of the second wave, in some ways has made the first one seem like, a ripple in a bathtub. It's so severe. I think one of the things the whole audience would want to see, how do you see this panning out and when do we get back to normal?
Thank you, Rana. That's, I think, a very, very relevant question and a question which probably no one has an answer to. But still, having said that, I'll try to, put things in context and maybe look in the crystal ball and see how things are going to pan out. The main thing is that we were doing very, very well with the first wave. In fact, we were in a very cozy situation. End of December, cases had come down. And by mid of January, we had the vaccine rollout. So it was like an ideal situation. If I remember Delhi was around 100 cases a day. And the vaccination had started. What actually, I think, happened is that the government, and that is the central as well as the state governments, the medical intelligentsia, the scientists, medical personnel, and all citizens at large, including all of us, we were lulled into a false sense of security. We became complacent. And if you remember, this is the time when things were going wrong in the US and in some other parts of the world. And actually, I've heard people kind of gloating and saying, see, we, are a developing country. Look at what's happening in the developed parts of the world. People are dying. I mean, there were days when in the US, every day, 3,000 people were dying. And here we are so fine. So I think the overall narrative was such that it led to lowering of the guard. There was no guard. And you remember that. How many people would probably in the medical establishments, we continued to wear masks diligently because there's always the fear that a COVID positive patient may be lingering in the corridors. But by and large, the markets were full. Weddings were happening. Election rallies were happening then as they are happening now. Now probably they've been banned. And social gatherings started. You remember we didn't meet our friends for 8 months, 10 months. And then suddenly there were these social gatherings. And when you gather like this, then even if you're a very diligent person, always wearing a mask, your mask has to be down. When you're drinking, you're eating, and that's what really happened. And if you remember, in October came news that a new kind of mutant, a double mutant as it's called, it's been given a name also now, B1617, if I'm not wrong, was discovered in Maharashtra through whole genome sequencing. And this probably was smoldering all the time. And as things went bad in February and onwards in Maharashtra, we now know that, data is still not forthcoming. One problem has also been opacity of data, which probably could have led to some corrective measures being taken on time. And I'm being very candid about it. But this was smoldering there. And as genomic sequencing in Punjab has shown that 80% of what they sequenced last month or the month before that, I don't know how long that time period is when the sequencing was done, they found 81% were the UK variant. So now you had 2 known mutants, and also there was a third mutant which was there in Bangladesh. In fact, Bangladesh had 80% of a third mutant, which is 1618. And that now seems to be the predominant mutant in Bengal, and which may be leading the surge now We will know, of course, after we have data available, but this is what is the presumption based on certain facts which have trickled today. So you have this new situation where your vaccination is going at a tardy pace, in the beginning with the healthcare workers and then with the frontline workers. I mean, even now, I think 50% of the healthcare workers have not been vaccinated because they just didn't come to get vaccinated. And you were having 3.5, 4 lakh vaccinations a day for a country the size of India with a population of nearly 1.4 billion. So vaccination, which could have been one of the saviors, was tardy. When you included first the over 60 and then the over 45, it increased in numbers. And we even went to, I think, nearly 4 million vaccinations a day. So we were capable of ramping up to that level, but people were just not coming. And you had these mutant viruses playing havoc. And so really, with the guard down, that's a recipe for disaster. And that's what we are seeing. If we could reach a level of 97,000 when we were all sitting, cowering in our homes and not getting out, not meeting anyone, and yet it reached 1 lakh. What happens when we are roaming around freely in the markets and socializing? So this is the reason I think we are crossing 3 lakhs every day. Delhi yesterday showed a positivity rate of 36%. And remember, out of this, only 65% are RT-PCR. I don't know separately how much is the RT-PCR positivity level, but probably it would be around 45 or more. Now looking into the future, currently we are grappling with the present. There's oxygen shortage. Hospitals in Delhi and some other parts of the country are running on an hour-to-hour basis of oxygen. I mean, you can just imagine the plight of the CEOs and the promoters and the doctors working there who don't know. I mean, as a doctor, you know, and I can also say, we care so much for our patients that when they miss one heartbeat, we miss 2. And imagine the situation when there's 1 hour. I mean, a CEO of a large chain of hospitals, I rang him up yesterday to ask for a room. Of course, there's no room. But he told me, why can't you help me? Help me. I have only 1 hour of oxygen left in the hospital. Just imagine the plight. So first we have to overcome this. The cases are still rising. What you're seeing in the hospitals today is from infection which happened a week or 2 weeks ago. Imagine what is going to happen when these 3 lakh plus are going to reach the hospitals. 3 lakh, and even if 5% need to go to hospital, and that is a figure which is well known from the first wave, 5% of 3 lakhs is a huge number. Where do you have the beds? How will you be able to, accommodate these patients? Patients are going to die. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. Even if we are able to overcome the oxygen crisis and the medicine crisis, the sheer numbers, and think of the healthcare workers who are not sleeping at night, who have been exhausted for a year, and now you have, God knows, another 6 months to go, if all goes well. And in the States, what is the kind of lockdown that's been done? I have never been a proponent of lockdown by the state. I've always been a proponent of self-lockdown. If we can protect ourselves, there's nothing better than that. But people at times have to go out. They have to earn their livelihood. But when states do a lockdown, how can you allow weddings? 50 people only. Who's checking whether it's 50 or 100? And so the lockdown is also soft. If anything, if we needed a strict lockdown, it is now. We have to break the chain of transmission and we have to become more responsible citizens. We have to look after ourselves, our families, COVID appropriate behavior, mask. And today I will say wear 2 masks. In hospital, we wear an N95 and on top of that, I wear a surgical mask, but at least 2 surgical masks, we have no dearth of them. Now, how long is this when is this going to peak? There are so many, mathematical calculations, but we've seen over the last 1 year, most mathematical calculations were absolutely wrong. But I would say the peak will be at least 6 weeks from now if we take care now. And then, so you're looking at about 3.5 to 4 months for this to reach about a 10,000 level as it was. And then if we don't improve, and if we don't learn, if we don't behave, if we are not responsible, both as governments and as citizens, then you are ready for a third wave. So I would say at least 3 to 4 months, we are going to have this really chaotic situation. And it'll take a lot of effort, a lot of planning, a lot of development of infrastructure. We've already told the government, let the residents actually start working, let the trainee nurses who are going to pass out, bring them in. Like that, we believe about 2 lakh fresh talent can be brought into the pool to help those who are already exhausted. And many are getting sick. So many have died. Probably that's the only way. Become responsible. That is all I can say. Government can only do that much. Thank you. Thank you, Rana.
Thank you, Dr. Mahajan. I think very somber thoughts, but I think it's a reality check. They say that those who forget history have to learn to relive it. And maybe, that's what's happened here. Gautam, I'll go next to you. And, you're one of those CEOs who's been struggling with what Dr. Mahajan said, the early problems of, oxygen, medicines, and a workforce which is now exhausted. So if you were to look back at the pandemic, what would you say are, some of the key learnings which we should not forget? And how will this alter the way the operating models of hospitals as we go ahead?
Thank you, Rana. And after Dr. Mahajan has given a very nice perspective on the past and what he thinks is going to be the future. So to talk about the hospitals, and I think all of us know pretty well what happened last year, the crisis, and all the hospitals had to do the infrastructure change, protocols change, and we didn't know the protocols. We didn't know anything about this, but we quickly learned on the fly. The expertise was brought from Korea, Italy, US, UK. So wherever it was available, it was translated and protocols developed for India. So that happened. So the learning from there was that this thing about waiting for something to be perfect, to do, to implement, I think it's not relevant anymore. Now, like Dr. Mahajan just said, just get people on board. So just get something going. But the challenge and I'm actually pretty sad about this, in the sense that last year, when the epidemic started, we knew the infrastructure is crumbling, it is not adequate enough, and so on and on. And a lot of infrastructure was supposedly created, that 1,000-bed hospital was created, or 500-bed hospital was created. But in reality, we all know it was not a hospital. It was just a quarantine center with some beds and maybe some, a couple of oxygen cylinders. So that's not like a hospital. So we should have utilized the time to enhance the capacity. And we've been talking about this for decades, that healthcare infrastructure needs revamp. We need to scale up the people. We need to scale up the beds. Nothing we have done. The other thing was our challenge. I should not be saying this, but we all heard about it, that we need to vaccinate 30 crore people by so-and-so date. If we are very sure of it, then we should plan accordingly. You plan the manufacturer's supply, you block the supply, you give him incentives, you ensure that he supplies. But we are India. We will not plan so in advance, and we will do only limited. And now suddenly we have opened it up for 1st May without knowing how much will be available to hospitals. And now technically it's possible for hospitals to vaccinate everybody, but it remains to be seen what will be available for us because of all these things which are put. But coming back to last year, so what the lesson, at least for me, was that the first, in the beginning of the pandemic, we stopped all non-COVID work. And it was only COVID. So, of course, hospitals suffered a massive loss. We are still incurring a loss. But over a period of time, the non-COVID patients would not wait. It was what was not emergency became emergency. So you started treating them. I mean, how long can you postpone a non-COVID surgery? So because of that, what we are seeing now is that we need to learn how to balance COVID and non-COVID. And to be honest, many healthcare organizations have also not learned that we should have used the time to augment our capacity of hiring more people. Probably we also got complacent that, the pandemic is receding, so let us not hire extra people. So today, the same people are being used for COVID and your non-COVID work is suffering. So I think that is a learning which one needs to know, that this pandemic or some similar such issues might happen very frequently. So we need to be ready with, extra manpower and different infrastructure and so on. Now, that will be a cost for the hospitals, but I don't know, maybe that is something which you have to think. The other thing which I learned was the level of collaboration really improved within the hospitals. I mean, hospitals were talking to each other. We were talking to suppliers. We were talking to diagnostic players. We were talking to vendors. It became a very nice ecosystem. And I am hoping that people remember that this is an ecosystem where, of course, people will say hospital is a driver of the ecosystem. Yes, but hospital cannot run without the other parts of the ecosystem. So all of us are in this together. So the mentality of, a transaction between a hospital and a vendor needs to now change to that we are all partners in delivering healthcare to the population of the country. So I think that is a good learning which I have, and I hope people remember that. The other thing is the vaccine we got in 1 year, which is the fastest ever. So what that also meant is that if we all put our heart and heads and minds and everything together, then we can achieve things in a short time. The trials can be done, the data is collected, research is published. I mean, to give you an example, we in our hospital, we are only a smaller hospital compared to the, international. We have 21 papers on COVID ongoing research studies, 21, and 4 more in the pipeline. So, so these, in addition to the regular work, what we are doing on diabetes type 1, on, TB research, all that is ongoing, and plus other specialties. So that is also an indication that things can be done if we want faster and we collaborate. Another thing which all of us as citizens we learned, and then of course, we are talking about it, that it is not possible for the government or the healthcare sector to treat all the population of the country. It's not possible. It's impossible. So the best way to do is to have preventive healthcare. And that's why we heard of many things on how to do preventive healthcare, how to build immunity. And some of it is correct, some of it is not correct, but whatever it is, the awareness of the fact that preventive healthcare is important has come into the minds of people. So that I think is a very, very positive step. So now one more thing I want to just say. The other thing which came out was that because hospitals, people didn't want to come to hospitals, so we quickly utilized the opportunity and we started delivering healthcare at home. So, at home, we are doing the COVID care packages at home. We are doing other things at home. So technology is now helping us reach the healthcare delivery at home. So now coming to the next question which you asked me, Rana, that what do I think is going to be the future? And I think all of us need to know, whether it is the hospitals, whether it is the pharma players, devices, diagnostics, everything, that there should be now a balance in our business model between preventive versus curative. So what can we do to become healthcare for the community? I am a healthcare for the community. Right now, I am not healthcare. I'm just a treatment for the community. So there is a little difference between that. So that, and then can I use the technology? Can I use the data? Most of people have wearables and phones and so much data is there. So can that be used in analytics to do some kind of what we were talking earlier of personalized medicine, gene therapy. I think all that is going to come. And when we talk of epidemic, maybe we will have one more epidemic. I don't know. But if we are ready with the infrastructure, if we fix the basic problems of the healthcare in the country, that will really help. And another thing before I close, Rana, is today we've been doing what we call as episodic care. So I have a problem, I go to the hospital, I get treated, I come back, and then I forget about my health. So one way is to look at preventive healthcare so that you look at it. But if somebody has a chronic condition, then maybe all the healthcare ecosystem needs to collaborate with other partners and deliver a continuum of care to the patient. So then we own the patient and say, okay, if you're at home, this is what you do, and you continue to do this kind of tests, and then come to the hospital. Doctor will guide you over the phone. For this, you don't need to come. When it becomes this serious, you come to the hospital. So we take care of the patient over a complete, complete cure, if I can say, a treatment option, instead of just episodic care. Now, there are many pros and cons. We don't have many people for it. It may be expensive. Whether we have technology, I don't know. Whether our healthcare professionals will like to work because it was a fee for service versus this. So there are lots of questions to be answered in this. But I am thinking that we need to plant the seed, and then somebody will answer the question. Maybe we will answer the question, and maybe this is how the business models will evolve. So over to you, Rana. Let's just see if there are any other thoughts from.
No, I think that's a very good summary of on ground. And again, I think we can't stick to the same business model because it's not been scalable, it's not been replicable, it's focused on a few areas. And in a way, what you're saying, it also doesn't serve the purpose, especially during a crisis. I'll next go to Sunil. And Sunil, I think as an investor, I mean, one of the things we always hear is that healthcare is recession proof. But, unfortunately, the pandemic really showed that healthcare is not recession-proof because, when the electives stopped, you only had COVID patients. A lot of hospitals found that there was a different business model. So how do you feel this transformation of the business model of a hospital will pan out? And especially, I think, a little focus on what will happen in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities.
Sure, Anna. So from our experience over the course of last 1 year, we were in any case as investors grappling to find the right healthcare model that sort of had minimal regulatory impact. Since 2017, as you know, there have been quite a few regulatory changes that have sort of started to make the services model a bit tricky one. Now, with the onset of pandemic, obviously, it got further complicated, and therefore, in our quest to find the best model, we started to focus on some of the components of how to work on creating a model that's nimble, which means you could quickly change around things to address the current environment. That's cost effective because everybody is now working towards making it cost effective, given the pressure from all sides, from all stakeholders, most importantly, the government. And the third nuance is obviously the entire regulatory impact, because that got compounded. The entire regulatory impact got compounded when we hit the pandemic period. So we started to work on our models and then started to work to make it futuristic, with all the three components. What we felt, and what we've experienced in the last 1 year, the big changes that we are seeing is the whole evolution of digitization. That intervention has had the maximum impact, positive impact, I would say, on the hospitals. And this impact is across how we are going about our clinical intervention, our customer-patient experience, and more importantly, the cost effectiveness and the quality service offering. So if I just pick up on the digitization impact, right throughout the last 1 year, most hospitals have started to move towards digital OPD models. There's been a significant change in the consumer and the doctor behavior to use the digital mode as an accepted norm for delivering OPD care. So that has had a lot of positive impact, which is you were able to deliver the service, with minimal load on the physical infrastructure in the hospital. So that was one big impact. Secondly, the consumer started to feel empowered. It came at convenience to the consumers. In most cases, were very, very cost effective. So there was this whole, positive impact of digital services when it came to the consumer experience. The second impact was obviously on the supply chain of how hospitals started to use digital intervention to bring down the cost. So that again was a big impact. So digitization was one area. The second was the entire supply chain. The supply chain area was more targeted towards bringing in certainty of service, cost effectiveness, and obviously the element of outsourcing. Certainty was, since when we went into a lockdown, a lot of these small service providers or supply chain partners gave up. And that is the time when we realized the importance of larger partners who had very strong BCPs in place, which is business continuity programs. So that realization dawned on most of the hospitals, the larger hospitals. So the importance of having quality partners who have strong BCP in place. The other important factor was cost. How do we look at each component of the supply chain to bring down the cost? And one area that we targeted, especially if I can talk about our portfolio company, is that how do we get into generic pharma and be able to get the same quality of medicine, but through a generic model, go reach out to the manufacturers directly. These are manufacturers who've been manufacturing, contract manufacturers who've been manufacturing for the larger pharma companies. So how do you get to those players directly and have the same quality, same molecule, and are able to bring the overall cost down? So that cost became an important factor. And third was obviously the outsourcing. How do you start to outsource most of the components, keeping in place the quality, and more importantly, bringing in cost effectiveness? So these were again, the supply chain was again to achieve nimbleness, cost effectiveness, and also, basically ward off any regulatory headwind. So supply chain being the second large component. The third large component was the entire workflow management. And again, the idea was to able to create flexibility of managing a hospital with the lower number of manpower. So bring the entire manpower ratio to bed below the standard 4 to 5 kind of a number that we have. And in that also, how do you start using digitization? So, all the service platforms were tested to the extreme. And suddenly they got the formula of, how to create efficient service model because they were forced to do it. And the realization dawned on them that, how do we actually make it for the future and on a sustained basis? So workflow was the third big area that we looked at. And the fourth one was how do we work with the ecosystem and be part of an integrated model? And this is where, when Gautam mentioned about things like home healthcare, how do we partner? Because now, especially in this, in this round of pandemic that we are seeing, the second wave, most people are going in for home isolation. And so we have investment in home healthcare companies also. We're seeing the load that is coming on them. So the realization has dawned on the entire ecosystem that if patients can be taken care of at home, they rather do it. And they rather take that offer rather than come to the hospital. So how do we become part of that integrated model? And with that also fix the care pathway. And the last bit is this entire financing. I think there has been a strong realization amongst all the stakeholders that health insurance or any other form of financing is an important component. So these are the big changes that we believe has come about in the ecosystem. And most of the players or most of the hospital providers are now using it for a sustained future service model. And that is going to be the future. So that's how I see the future panning out for the healthcare services sector.
No, thank you, Sunil. I think some of these new building blocks will become very, very important, as we go ahead. And we also should not forget and go back to, the old way of doing things, because, it's a different thing. What can be, given that, the healthcare system is so stretched, why do something in a hospital when you can do it at home? Dr. Mahajan, I think one of the things in the pandemic was very unique. Normally when you go to hospital, only the patient is at risk, but here the caregiver and the doctor all are at risk. So I think that basically virtual care came into the mainstream, which would have happened in 5 years, I think happened in 5 weeks. How, along with the artificial intelligence from the data we create, how do you see the business model now panning out, to make healthcare much more accountable and affordable?
You're very right, Rana, that the delivery systems have changed, and Sunil and Gautam have both alluded to it. And this was more because of the fact that you can get infected. You may even infect the patient. I mean, it's not invariable that only the patient will infect the doctor. It could be the other way around as well. And hence, the reluctance of patients to go out of their house and not do a face-to-face meeting. Till the pandemic came, we always believed in the experience of being with the doctor, sitting with the doctor, having a face-to-face meeting, seeing the expressions, and only then would it be sufficient. I mean, you have patients who came 500 miles or 1,000 miles away to see a particular specialist and be able to spend 3 or 5 minutes with him and yet be satisfied. And apart from the fact that the patient was not happy, we as the caregivers, as providers of healthcare, were also not ready and not willing to do the virtual consults, which, as you know, since the early 2000s, there's been this talk that the only way India will be able to service its needs and the needs of its people will be through telemedicine. And Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam was a huge proponent of it. Many centers were set up. And even during his lifetime, there was hardly anything of note that came into being, into use, which would have benefited. Isolated good examples only went to prove that this is workable. Now, what this pandemic showed is that this works. And especially in a country like India, where we've leapfrogged from a situation where getting a landline phone used to take 10 years to a situation where we leapfrogged ahead of the US in terms of cellular networks and cellular phones to the extent that nearly everyone carries a cellular phone now. So that was the building block on which telemedicine became possible, remote consults became possible, because with this phone you could access, and the systems were such that it didn't require much modification in the hospital. You had to just set up a virtual consult booth or a room where a doctor sitting would remotely be able to consult, and that's happening on a daily basis now. So the fact that we have these telephone networks and also we have satellites up above in the air, if it were to be done on a huge basis, on a PPP basis, a government trying to provide service, the PHCs are hardly manned by doctors. Even if there is a doctor posted there, it's probably the technician or the compounder there who's doing all the doctory, so to say, and the doctors have been missing. And this probably is the only way that we'll be able to man the PHCs, where you may even have a nurse practitioner. And this is something I think the future needs if we are to use telemedicine robustly and in a manner so as to be able to cater to the masses. So the building blocks were there. The hospitals and individual doctors, it wasn't just the hospitals, but each individual doctor from his home, because doctors, especially those who were 50 plus, were very reluctant to come out of their homes and go to the OPDs. And so even for their patients in the hospitals, they developed this teleconsult. Someone is in the hospital, a junior doctor is seen, and the senior sitting at home is able to consult. So all of that infrastructure is now in place. It may not be very robust, but we can definitely improve on it, build on it, and there's huge opportunity in this field. And I feel the next decade belongs to whosoever is able to do telemedicine well in such a manner that the missing GP can be brought in through the telemedicine route. That, as Gautam said, every patient needn't rush to a hospital. You can have home care, but the first piece of this, and this is all possible because of digital revolution in our country. I mean, that's the basic reason why we are even talking about this. And we've been able to accomplish it to some extent in this pandemic. So digitization, which has happened very rapidly, even small hospitals, which would never have gone digital, which never would have had PACS to be able to, transfer X-rays or CTs from one place to another. And then the WhatsApp has been a savior. So all these technologies put together are where we are headed. Of course, this informal transfer of data, which is not protected, which is not private, I think this will not carry on for very long. Systems are going to kick in. And also, right in the beginning of the pandemic, as early as March and then April, the Government of India made telemedicine legal. Before this, it surprises many people when they learn that it was illegal, even though we've been trying since the early 2000s, but it was illegal. And it's only because of the pandemic that very quickly a very robust and well thought out act has come out, which permits telemedicine legally. Now, moving on to the field of artificial intelligence, and as you know, at Caring, we do a lot of work in this, predominantly in the field of radiology and imaging. But any digital data can be used, and artificial intelligence algorithms using deep learning or machine learning can be developed. And this is where the world is headed. And somehow we are very pleased at Mahajan Imaging and at Caring that somehow a few years ago we chose the right fields to be in, apart from imaging, which we've been doing for over 30 years, artificial intelligence and genomics, because genomics again is a lot of data. And so with artificial intelligence, you will have reports being read on their own by computers. Of course, it's easier said than done, and it hasn't happened as quickly as many had presumed. But X-rays, CTs, MRIs, PET CTs, in the years to come, they will be read on their own. Then even telepathology. And then we are generating tons of data for every individual patient. You have the clinical history and findings, you have the biochemistry, you have the microbiology, you have pathological tests, you have imaging tests. Then there is this huge field of genomics. Who is going to put all this together? Is it possible for a physician or a surgeon sitting in his OPD to be able to look at these 10 reports and be able to make sense, to be able to chew it, digest it, and then be able to, demonstrate as to what is to be done? This will all, I believe, be done by artificial intelligence. And I've been saying this for 7 years. We are going to have a new field of diagnostics, which will be integrated diagnostics. You will probably have new specialists in this field of integrated diagnostics who will be able to take all this data helped by artificial intelligence, digest it, suggest the outcome, the final diagnosis, or the probable 2 or 3 diagnoses, and give it to the clinician. And the clinician also is going to be using artificial intelligence, because there's this output of diagnosis which has been given. And then there are 20 different therapies that may be available, which is best suited for this guy who has a genomic profile ABC and who has cancer which is spread to the entire body or which is only localized to the organ. Does he require surgery? Does he require chemotherapy? Chemotherapy, which kind? So here we are talking of predictive medicine, that is preventive, so that, you catch it so early. And this is where actually diagnostics is headed. And like we talk of reactive medicine, similarly, we are more used to diagnosing disease, whereas we need to be able to diagnose disease the moment it's occurring, or better still, be able to prevent it. So that's predictive and preventive medicine, where I think both imaging as well as genomics is going to play a major role, because we now realize most of the diseases, including cancer, heart disease, dementias, they all have a genetic basis. And we have the tools now, very expensive, but we have the tools to be able to find this. And as volumes increase, it is definitely going to become cheaper. And then precision medicine, which again, with imaging and with genomics, the same person, when you look under the microscope, 5 different people with same cancer, looking identical, maybe 5 different subtypes of cancer when you do genetic profiling, when you do genomics of the cancer cells. And then this physician will be helped by AI, which has gone through 1,000 papers which are present on this disease, and will be told that this 2 or 3 options appear to be the same. I'm not excluding the human being from this whole chain. The human being will remain very, very important, but doctors who adopt and adapt to artificial intelligence are going to replace those who do not. And I like to quote Jack Welch, the legendary chairman of GE. I think we as doctors, we as healthcare professionals have to change. He said, change before you have to. And the second thing I like what he said is control your own destiny or someone else will. So I think the future is very, very bright, and it is the digital revolution that's going to make the entire change. Over to you.
No, thank you, Dr. Mahajan. I think very prophetic. I think right from saying telemedicine, which has been a technology for 50 years, now it has the business model behind it. And the new age medicine, driven by AI and genomics, which I think is going to be fundamentally a very different way and a very different place to play. Gautam, next to you. So one of the things we've looked at in the pandemic is that the hospitals in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities did relatively well. So normally people would move to Bombay whenever it was required. Now, when mobility was not possible, you went to your local hospital and you found that it wasn't as bad as you thought it was. So I think the whole idea is we have a set of hospitals, while, I think the top 10 hospital chains only have 9% of the beds in India. So they obviously punch above their weight. But there are many 50, 100, 200 bed hospitals, which are really doing a good job, but somehow do you see going ahead, can they be a platform play? Can they be aggregated to create real value, both for themselves as well as for the patient?
So, Rana, just quick thing on why the tier 2 and tier 3 hospitals did well and how it will bode in the future. You know, local proximity during lockdown was an important factor. But I have to say this, that for healthcare to progress, you of course you need immediate care and treatment and so on, but you also need the inputs of cutting edge research. You need some education, so the clinicians need to update themselves with knowledge, and that is what is provided in the larger setups. So the difference between the two hospitals may be that they both are treating for the same disease, but one clinician may have maybe also doing some research, may also be doing some teaching, and he's also focused on the future. And the difference between other difference may be the equipments. So of course standard equipment would be available everywhere, but the cutting edge, which is probably very expensive and not everybody can afford, will be available in the larger hospitals. So that difference will continue to be there. And having understood that, the value which will be brought to the tier 2 and tier 3 hospitals, while tier 1 hospitals will be immense if they start collaborating in these areas. Then of course, like right now we have free sharing of information on COVID. Treatment protocols are being discussed. The clinicians from one hospitals, they are sharing with across the country that this is, so this kind of knowledge sharing, if it happens on an ongoing basis, will work. The teaching, the research, all that will work. Now, as an aggregator, so when we say as an aggregator, I understand that the people like to think as Uber or OYO or that kind of a model. The challenge with that is that our systems, we are not integrated. I mean, the HIS system in one hospital will be different from the other. So our IT systems are not integrated, our protocols are not integrated. So it is very difficult to ensure standard quality of service across a platform. So if you say that I have 50 hospitals on a platform, the question will be, how will you ensure similar quality, similar standards? So that's one. Maybe it can be addressed. The other aspect is the technology involvement will be very high, because right now, and we are all in the healthcare, so we know healthcare is a little laggard in adopting technology. So I mean, so we know we are very conservative. We like that everybody has tried it first, then we try it. So the technology gap will also ensure that this platform doesn't happen so soon. But can it happen? What are the benefits? Of course, the benefits of this will be that the patients across the country, they can just go and, like how they get access to other services, can access a bed in any city and access any doctor. But I think, in my view, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think it's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years. That it's a pipe dream, because we don't have the technology, we don't know how to ensure tech quality. And the other thing is, there is a inherent, I don't want to use the word mistrust, but inherent lack of understanding that what is the objective of collaboration. That if one person has the objective of, everybody has the objective of treating the patients, but some of them are for-profit model, some of them are not-for-profit model, some of them are individual owned, some of them are corporate. So this understanding, the common vision of why they want to be on a platform will also drive it. Now, having said that, last thing we all need to do, and again, this is a seed, that whatever we do, we should not put hospitals on a platform because hospitals on a platform will result in a larger platform and larger access to opportunities and so on and on. No. If it works for the patient, if it works for a patient in tier 2, tier 3 town or tier 1 town, when somebody is traveling, if it helps the patient, if it is patient-centric, this is the model to be followed. But, like I said, many things to be checked before it happens. So leaving it at that, Rana.
Rana, can I take 30 seconds to, just one comment? The tier 2 and tier 3 centers and hospitals appear to have done as well in COVID because predominantly the treatment is supportive. And so what you can do in a tier 2 or tier 3 is very similar to what is being done in tier 1. That's point number 1. Point number 2, as Gautam said, this treatment more or less was standardized. And very, very few people actually need the ventilator when really, the difference between the good and the bad may come to the fore. So that's another reason why hospitals have done equally well everywhere. Thank you.
No, a very valid point. And Sunil, we'll finally go to you. I think you did mention about, the new set of players are coming. One is that, hospital, the delivery space is increasing. But I think it's going to be more an ecosystem play, as we've seen with, everything, whether it's financial, retail. I think the ecosystem play becomes very important. So whether it's a GPO, whether it's an e-pharmacy. So how do you think they will grow and create value and also grow exponentially? Because hospitals have grown traditionally very slowly.
Absolutely. And before I answer the question, sorry, I have a hard stop at 5 o'clock. So Dr. Mahajan, Gautam, Rana, I'm sorry, I'll jump off if you don't mind after answering the question. So, I strongly believe that the ecosystem will undergo a very dynamic change, and it has already started. And if I take up two models which are fast evolving, one on the consumer side and the other one on the institutional side. The consumer side, e-pharmacy is the one which has obviously got up to a great start. And, in fact, in a very short span of 3 or 4 years, we've now started to see consolidation. So that's one model which is going to change the ecosystem and have a very strong, big impact on how care is going to get delivered. And I'll come to it, of how it'll change it. The second one is on the hospital side. This is more institutional, of how the GPO kind of a model will change the supply chain for hospitals. And both of these are more digital interventions and will have huge impact. And both of them have few commonalities. And the commonalities are they're aggregating demand through a high frequency hook. And then they will move to the supply chain of how they consolidate the entire supply chain once they've basically got good traction on the demand side. High frequency hook, if I pick up, say, the e-pharmacy, is pharmacy purchase. In the entire healthcare services or needs of a patient, pharmacy need is one which comes with a very high frequency usage compared to secondary care, tertiary care, or diagnostics. So there they are offering three things, and that's again relevant for both the institutional and the consumer model, which is cost, convenience, and quality. So high frequency pharma purchase, what they are offering is discounted pharmacy. Convenience, it's on tap of your mobile, you get the product, and now in most cases it's the same day delivery if you're in tier 1 urban centers. And third is quality, as in you can be assured compared to most physical stores, you can be assured that it's a good quality. So they are now creating a good demand aggregation model, getting in consumers, some of them are patients, and slowly they will start to change the entire care pathway model. And how they will do it is, and then this pandemic has accelerated that movement towards influence on the care pathway. Is now they have started to, once they've got a decent number of consumer patients on their platform, they've started to now offer diagnostics. It's become a marketplace for diagnostic. And again, offering the same thing, cost, convenience, and quality. Then they are planning to add, they've already added outpatient, OPD. So with these three things, which is pharma sales, which is diagnostics, and which is OPD, they will have a very strong influence on the patient. And then they will become the doorkeeper for any inpatient. And that's when the partnership with the hospital will start to work. In fact, in most cases, they've already started to partner with the hospitals. And the additional proposition that they're going to provide to patient, which will have very strong need and demand, is the outpatient financing. Once they create this closed loop, where they will start to offer a OPD insurance model, which is so far next to nothing in India. In a closed loop model, they will start to offer that, you have to consult doctors on the panel. The doctor will give digital prescription. You have to then go to the diagnostic center on the platform, and they will prescribe medicine, and then the medicine will get delivered by the pharmacy. So with this, you can imagine the kind of influence and the kind of traction that they will have. This is the retail consumer side. When I get to the institutional side, the whole GPO model, there again, the high frequency hook for any hospital is on tap delivery of consumables, products which, especially for tier 2, tier 3 cities, is not available, high quality and at a good cost. All these three propositions today are not available for hospitals in tier 2, tier 3 cities. So high frequency, and obviously hospital being institutional, its requirements are at a very high frequency. Once they start to come on the platform, the entire GPO model will start to evolve. And what will be that GPO model? Where these companies will go to the hospital and say that you don't need to keep coming to the platform to buy it. I will load up the application on your platform. You just need to give us, and that artificial intelligence after some time will start to automatically take care of how many inpatients will you have, how many surgeries will you do, what kind of surgeries will you do. And we will manage the entire supply chain, because, artificial intelligence start to throw up that if a cardiac intervention or a cardiac surgery would require XYZ consumables, and how many of them will they be doing in a day or in a week. So with that, they will, crunch the entire supply requirement for a hospital and make it efficient. Working capital will go down, and therefore the cost will start to go down. And it's an outsourced model, which hospital is not good at. At the end of the day, hospital is meant to provide clinical care. It is not meant to provide supply chain or beds or infrastructure. So that's how these two models will start to influence the entire healthcare delivery ecosystem.
No, thank you, Sunil. I think that was really very insightful, and I know you got to drop off, but I think we've come to the end. I think it was very, very insightful, because I think to look at what have been the lessons from the pandemic, how do we move ahead? We are going to witness tectonic changes on the healthcare side. The business model is going to change, the accessibility to care, the way we come in, and the whole consumer. I mean, we called him a patient, but today I think he's more of a consumer, and the needs of a consumer are very, very different. So I wanted to thank all my panelists, Dr. Mahajan, Sunil, and finally I wanted to thank the audience. This has been a wonderful session. I think we are in difficult times, so take care and stay safe. Thank you.